values have much, much more value than we think. They matter for business success in all kinds of ways, and we should take advantage of that. Use them to make our organizations more successful while benefiting the world. We know values are important. That's why we're here. But they also hold tremendous business value. When companies have values, when they take them seriously and act on them, they create tremendous value, including for the companies themselves.
Sawatika, please raise your hand if you work for an organization that has values. Oh, good. Okay, I was hoping that would be most of you. That's good. Now, raise your hand if you think that your organization captures and measures all of the value that you create for the world and for the company of your values. So raise your hand if you think you capture 100% of the value. Okay, no hands, right? Okay. Raise your hand if you think your company captures 50% of the value, or your organization. Still very few hands, if any. How about a little bit of the value? If your organization captures a little bit of the value that you generate for the world or for your organization as a result of values. Okay, good. Okay, good, that's good. So we have some work to do, but I think we're going to help you with that journey and share some tips with you today. So what do we mean when we say companies act on values? When they look outward beyond their interests, beyond their immediate interests, and see what could be improved. So I'm going to give you an example. A tire company looked at the small businesses that grow the rubber that it uses to make its tires. And the small businesses were not economically secure. And as a result, many of them had their children working on the farms. And some of their practices weren't environmentally sustainable. So the tire company worked with its entire industry, the entire tire industry, to help change the agricultural practices to ones that decreased environmental impact while increasing productivity. So what's the result of this? Greater sustainability and more income for the small businesses, which enabled their children to spend more time in school and their families to live better lives. The company involved in this example is a real company. It's Pirelli, which is one of the world's leading tire companies. But there are many, many companies doing things like this, many of yours, and more every day. One thing that we often don't see is the full value that these companies get from acting on their values. And we just saw that through the raise of hands, right? So Pirelli and the industry got a more secure supply of rubber. They also lowered their price volatility, and they improved their ability to plan. They also got employees who are proud to work for a company that shares their values and acts on their values. Liquid assets. So Biogen, a pharmaceutical company based in the US, wanted to reduce its water impact in California, which is a water-stressed state. They redesigned the processes to use recycled water for cooling, saving over 10 million liters of drinkable water, and at the same time lowering their costs by over 50%. The company had been looking for efficiencies since it was founded nearly 30 years ago. But until they used a sustainability lens, this opportunity had remained hidden. We know that designing in values helps in many ways. It can lead to and open up new markets. acting sustainably can matter to customers and help make a difference when they're choosing between us and a competitor. And we know that customers are more loyal when they see us acting on values. Method, a detergent and cleaning supply company, has found that their sustainability was the #1 driver of their customer loyalty once they already had somebody as a customer. We know that employees care and that they're more likely to join, they're more likely to stay, and they're more likely to be highly productive with a company that shares their values. And we know that acting on values means better support from local communities, and it means less chance of regulation, of protest and opposition, making expansion easier and also helping with other challenges that the business faces. We also know that thinking about values encourages innovation, new products, and new uses. So we're all familiar with Nike and their Flyknit process, but it uses much less material to produce shoes. And it's also a billion-dollar business for Nike. In fact, the tie to innovation with sustainability is so strong that Nike has named their sustainability department the Sustainable Business and Innovation Department.
But there are problems with what we know about how values create value. The first problem is that we dramatically undervalue the value of the things we see on the list. The second is that this list is far, far from complete. I spoke to the Senior Vice President of Responsibility and Sustainability at a very large company. I asked her, how much value do you think this company gets from your employees knowing that you share their values as a company? She said, I think it's $3 million a year. But if we asked my executives, they would say 300,000. We went through the calculation step by step using conservative numbers, and we found the real number was $60 million per year. This is an example of how we as sustainability practitioners undervalue values. Her guess was low by 20 times. But it's worse than that. Her executive's guess was low by 200 times. I also conducted some research on how much being a sustainability leader matters to being an innovation leader. I asked dozens of people, how much do you think it matters? A large number of them said, I don't think there's any relationship. Sustainability leader, innovation leader, no connection. Especially those outside of sustainability. Some people said, I think there's a connection. I think it's between 15 and 30%. Now, a 15 or 30% improvement in the chance of being an innovation leader, that's great. That's something businesses care about. But the real number was 400%. This is another example of how we underestimate the business value that comes from acting on values. Again, the sustainability personnel underestimated by 10 to 20x. And the other people who said there was no connection, they underestimated even more than in the employee example that we saw. The second problem is that this list that we just saw is very, very incomplete. It turns out there are over 30 different ways, specific ways, that having values and acting on values creates value. They fall into 4 categories. And we've talked about how it affects customers' behavior. And we've talked about how it affects employees' behavior. But it also affects value network behavior. For example, the best, most innovative suppliers. Who do they want to work with? The ones that share their values. And the risk of supply chain disruption is lower for sustainable companies that act on their values. Why do we so underestimate? Well, it's because most of the value that values create is submerged below the surface. Each item that we see the value of is actually much more value than we believe. And there are more of them. Here's a little example. Imagine a company that uses a chemical that in 2 years will be regulated by the REACH regulations in Europe. But they're in an industry that is forever exempt from REACH, which means they can continue to use that chemical forever. They could switch to a more sustainable chemical, which costs 5% more. What is the financial value of acting on their value for sustainability and switching? Almost everyone I've ever asked this question has said there's no financial value because they can continue to use this chemical forever. And that makes sense, but it's wrong. Think about what happens to the supplier of that chemical. Most of their customers cannot continue to use the chemical because they're not exempt from REACH, which means the demand for the chemical is going to go down. The logical thing for the supplier to do is to cut back on production. When that happens, prices go up, typically between 35% and 300%. In addition, you often have trouble getting the supply that you need. In fact, one company that I worked with had to pay a reservation fee for the right to pay the new higher price for the chemical. It looked like there was no financial value in acting on values, but in fact there was tremendous value. In addition to the immediate financial impact of the higher price and the reservation fee, one other company had to shut down production for a week because they couldn't get the input they needed. What that means is that we see a little bit of the benefit of acting on values. But the truth is, there are more ways in which acting with values creates value, and each of those creates dramatically more value, which means the true amount of value that we create by living our values is much greater than we believe. What do we do with that? Once we realize that acting on values is so powerful organizationally as well as for the world, what do we do? The first thing is to help ourselves do more and to help others do more to live their values. One way to do that is to measure the value that values create. This is very useful because when we quantify the value, we start speaking the language of the business people and the financial people. And that changes the conversation with them. Also, when something is measured, even if not perfectly, it engages the improvement genius inside humanity. That's how we've been able to double the processing power of computer chips every 2 years for decades. That's how The price of solar cells has gone down more than 50% just since 2010. That amazing ability to improve was engaged. Where do we look? The other thing we need to do is we need to look beyond the transaction and beyond today. The first thing that we do is look at suppliers, the industry, our own company and employees and customers, and see our effect on them. But we don't stop there. The next thing we do is to expand our view of each of those areas so that we see, for example, our suppliers probably supply other companies. What about their suppliers? What about our employees, families, and communities? Or our customers' family and communities? And so on. When we do this, we can expand our view and we can bring values into our design and our planning process, into our strategy and our operations. When we think about expanding our business, we ask questions like, what communities are we in and which ones could we be in? Which resources do we need and which are becoming more scarce in the world? Could we contribute to making the world better by what we do? Or could we contribute by helping others do better, by becoming a catalyst so that they can improve more and faster? When we do this, we ask 4 simple questions. The first is, who needs to make a difference in what they're doing? The second is, what is it they need to do? The third is, what wall is preventing them from advancing? And the fourth is, what is the way that we can help them get beyond that wall? For example, a lot of small farmers are not that water efficient. That's the who. They could reduce pressure on water supplies in areas with rapidly growing population if they were to be more water efficient. That's the what. But a lot of times they don't have either the knowledge of the techniques or the capital required to implement them. That's the wall. What if we could help them to learn about and implement these techniques? Or even if we can't do that, what if we worked with others, NGOs, our industry, or governments, to help them do these things differently? That's the way. That's how we engage the value of values. That's how we release the tremendous potential that values have for the world and for our organizations. There's only one thing left to do with that. Once we have thought, we've incorporated into our planning, once we are ready to live our values, and that's to go and do it.
Okay, so if you raised your hands earlier that your organization has values connected to sustainability, connected to responsibility, raise your hands again. Okay, now pull out your phone and open up an email because we need your stories. If you send us an email with what the values are in your organization that are connected to responsibility and sustainability, we would be very appreciative. And even more than that, if you are one of the few who raised your hand that your organization actually captures and measures the value of your values, either to society and the world and the planet, or to your organization, We would be extremely grateful for those stories. So please send us an email or grab us in the hall after this. We'll be here till the end of the day, right? And we'd be happy to talk to you and hear your stories, because we're trying to collect as many as we can to amplify them and inspire others to go. Kom kom kap.